Hey everyone, welcome. So we are starting a couple of minutes early, like maybe 2 minutes, but we were done with all the prep work and we thought, why not? So that means that when people join, they get straight into the content and they don't have to listen to the preamble. So just general, I want to get into this. So just general shout out to kind of our sponsors, which is IO Digital, NML. So IO Digital is the company Liesel used to work for. NML is where Justin works, and then also KRS, which has really been helping a ton in terms of just kind of all our operational overheads and stuff. So yeah, like support them. We really appreciate kind of all the help they give us. So let's get into it. So you might know me and Schalk Neethling from kind of the mental health and tech stuff that we do. So for once, we are going to be talking about something that is not related to depression or anxiety, and also like I would say in terms of anxiety inducing or depression inducing, I think Zod is probably the furthest from it. Like Zod is amazing. I think Zod has really made my general developer experience and kind of working with endpoints and stuff that's not, that doesn't have end to end like type safety and stuff, like just amazing. So if anything, I'd say like that Zod and also all the upcoming contenders now. So there's also like Valleybot. What's another one? There's another one as well, and then I know Effect kind of has their own kind of implementation-ish version of it that's called Schema.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, but Zod was kind of the first tool to kind of like try this approach of having your runtime validation and your actual static typing kind of be in sync, which is amazing. So, if it
Yep.
isn't clear, and also sorry about the noise. If oh, tijd vir boekie lees. Okay. I think this is the part where I just hand over to Skulk. So Skulk, I'm happy for you to just do a bit of an intro, who you are, what you're going to be talking about, and so forth. Yeah,
Sweet.
let's get into it. If you want to share your screen, like I'll just pop it on here. Also, if you guys are watching this, there's a new shiny thing here where I'll enable it now. You'll see there's this little gradient thing here on the side, and it actually it's a new thing they added, which actually means that it shows up the comments on the screen. Let me actually just give
Oh.
it a test run. Okay, give me a second. This is why we start early, because so I can do stuff like this. Uh, let's see if it shows up. Oh, okay. Hey, look at that.
There
Okay,
it is.
cool. So,
Nice.
if you have any questions, please pop them in the text chat. I'll just bring them up on the screen like this. Make it nice and big, and then we can address it. And like, I encourage you guys to ask questions as we go, because I think this is the value of something like this over just watching a YouTube video on like Zod or whatever, is that you can ask more meaningful stuff instead of just sitting back and kind of having someone talk to you and tell you what it is. And I think that's also kind of the style that Schalk Neethling has prepared. Knowing anything about him, he's probably just going to go straight in hands on and just start showing examples instead of like sitting back and doing a slideshow. So, yep.
Yes.
Well, I think that's enough, and I've exhausted my 3 minutes that I gained from starting early. So let's get into it.
Cool. Thanks, Gok. Yeah. So a little bit about me. What can I say? Front-end engineer, been doing it for, I don't know, I've lost count. I think it's 15 years. Maybe it's more, but let's say 15, and I feel it's close enough. Been around all over the show, but actually spent most of my time at Mozilla for about 12 years, did a whole array of things over there. And then over the last year, I've been jumping through various things, some things by choice, some things by not by choice. But I've been at a company called Factorial now for the last little bit over a year, a German agency, and absolutely love it there. A bunch of really, really great people, people that's really into what they do. They love what they do, love. So we talk open standards, web standards all day, and get to work on a bunch of interesting projects, as is the case at agencies. You often jump through a whole bunch of different things, so you get to see all kinds of arrays of components and forms and all these kinds of things that constantly keep you on your toes. And one of the things that's been keeping me on my toes is forms and form validation. And it's generally a bit of a pain to do that. And sometimes people try to do their own little bespoke thing, and they really engineer it quite specifically and try to make it really, really magical. But then you get to this point where it's a little too magical and where it makes too many assumptions, and suddenly things start to fall apart and you end monkey patching until it's this weird spaghetti monster that nobody knows what's going on, and you're just glad it still works. And Zod came across my radar a couple of times. And I think the first time I saw it, I completely misunderstood what it was. To be fair, I didn't really look at it. I kind of looked at the thing and I saw something TypeScript, and I thought, somebody trying to compete with TypeScript. I kind of figured TypeScript won, whatever. And I moved on. There's like too many things to think about. But then it came up again and again, and like there was this one like 10-minute video on YouTube, and I thought, okay, let me watch it. And holy cow, once I understood what it was, I thought, nah, it can't be that good. And then I tried it just on a little side project. So basically, I had a little form, and when you submit the form, it calls an netlify function, and the netlify function calls GitHub, and it sticks it in GitHub issue. And I was like, can I really use Zod for the form validation and the data validation from a single? And it's like, yes, you can. And you can also use it with just JavaScript. For me, that's quite a thing. Like these days, people kind of think everybody's writing TypeScript, and that's true in a lot of cases. But for example, at Factorial, a lot of what we do is just plain old JavaScript, no TypeScript. So it was great to know that even though it says TypeScript first, by no means do you need TypeScript to use Zod. It just gets better when you also have TypeScript playing along with you. So I would think the kind of model you can think of this is inside VS Code or your editor of choice. TypeScript is there to kind of handhold and tell you, like, I think you're going to mess up here. You probably want to do this, that, because these types aren't going to match up. But then when you get in the browser, now TypeScript is gone, and all that niceties has fallen away. So Zod kind of fills this. It plays nice with TypeScript with you in your editor, but then when you get to wherever you're deploying your code, Zod can sort out your types and all this kind of stuff there. And this is, of course, then especially useful for form validation. The thing is, we'll have a little bit of a look at what Zod gives you. And let me preface this by saying Zod is a big library. It can do a lot. Like you can have a workshop on this and not cover everything. So I will not cover everything in the time we have today, but I try to set up a scenario that I think is rather common and shows little unique things that you might run into and be like, oh crap, how do I do this? So that we can see some of the power of Zod. But also basically also show different types of inputs that you're working with, even though with forms, pretty much everything strings, but we can do some formatting of our data, and some things actually comes in arrays and all that kind of stuff. So, okay. So let me think where to start. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. I think that's probably a good place to start. So share my screen, and I'm going to jump quickly over to the browser. Okay, so this is the form that we are going to use. Excuse my UX. As I always do, I leave things to the last minute, and then I got sick on top of it. So now I ran out of it. So it looks okay. The most important thing is what we're going to do behind this form. So excuse what it looks like. So basically what makes this form a little unique is we have some variations that can happen in this form. So you can just go ahead and choose one or more of the fields at the top. You can then choose or not choose one of the catalogs. You've got some personal information that you're going to fill in. One of these is an email address, which is, of course, interesting right there already. And then you got like a street address, a postal code, you got a city, and then you have a country. And the interesting thing that we're going to look at with the country is if you choose South Africa, all of a sudden the province field is no longer optional. So that is a little bit of a tricky one. And then, of course, we have a little checkbox down here where you agreed to the privacy policy, and you need to do that in order to submit the form. But you could also choose to book a roastery tour. And if you do that, well, now you have a bunch of additional fields to choose from. Now, of course, if you submit a form, like a plain old HTML form, and you haven't checked anything here, this will make it to the form. It won't end up in your code at the end. But if you've chosen a day, you must choose a time of day, and vice versa. If you've, let me refresh this guy. Oh, let me do a hard refresh. If you chose a time of day, I would expect you to also choose a day. But so this whole section is kind of just separate, and it is required, and then it's not required at all. So we need to kind of handle that kind of thing. So our schema changes a little bit depending on what the user have chosen here. So that is the form that we're going to be using. And we'll come back and forth, and I'll show you. So again, I'll mention specific places where I'm choosing to go a specific route with Zod, but I will mention that, by the way, you also don't have to, for example, call flatten error, and then you get like a bigger object back. But there's some interesting things in here that goes along with your naming of your input fields and all your form fields. And if you name them a specific way, there's a little trick you can do in your JavaScript that makes it easy to add form validation directly to the field that's an error, which is always kind of nice. So, okay, so that's our form. So I think before we dive into anything HTML or JavaScript, let's just have a quick look at the payload. So this is kind of what we would expect a valid payload to look like. So I hope this is big enough. If it's not, please shout and I can zoom in if need be. So we know that our sample type can have potentially 3 or fewer strings, an array of strings. We have, if the person also decided to do the tour, we will have a tour day, we will have a preferred time. We might have a catalog type if they chose one. Then we have their title, first name, last name, email, phone, street, blah, blah, blah. All of these are just strings. And the reason why I made postal code a string is, let's say you're on the global scale and you have to deal with, for example, the United Kingdom. Well, you can't force their postal codes to be only numeric because they also have letters and stuff within there. So I figured let's just keep it simple, and we'll leave postal code also as just a string. And then we have our country, our province, which may or may not be there. And then the only one,
another thing as well,
yes,
like with like kind of alphanumeric or numeric strings versus like numbers, is also like if you make it a number, like it can't start with 0.
yes,
So something like I don't even actually know if there are postal codes that start with 0, but like the key difference between a number and a numeric string is that a number is something that you aim to add and subtract and minus and so forth. And a general rule of thumb is if you're like, there's no point to multiply a postal code by 3 or whatever, you know. So definitionally, it's not a number. It's not an amount of something. It's a string, but it's a string that even if it was just numbers, only takes numbers. So that's kind of the general rule of thumb that I use myself as well. But it's a really good distinction.
yeah, no, definitely. And I know also that, for example, that's why generally in the HTML specification, they say not to use input type number for these kinds of things,
Yes.
because you should use those when you intend to use the number for some kind of mathematical thing. Otherwise, you do have...
because it has that up and down, like
Exactly.
some browsers. Yeah, exactly. So no one is gonna go like, oh, I need to enter my postal code. Okay, +1 +1 +1 +1 plus, you know. So
Yeah, no,
yeah,
definitely.
it's a completely different thing, and I think sometimes people get confused by that it's actually a string. It's actually not a number. It's just a string that, you know, contains either just numbers or like mostly number characters. Yeah. And sorry, I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but I think this
No,
is an
fine.
important thing. Is like I actually think Zot doesn't support numeric validation. Like, so,
Um,
and I remember that being something, and I'm like, I to this day still don't really actually know why. That seems very strange. If I'm not mistaken, like there's no way to check if a string only contains numbers. You need to just use like a regex or something.
they got some
So
stuff now, which might be a Zod 4 thing.
yes, Zod 4
Um,
is a big change, but we'll probably talk about that as well. I actually, fun fact, I have a form library. It's probably like my
mhm,
most downloaded like third party thing that I released, that I
mhm.
still need to update to Zod 4, which is still just on Zod 3 because it's such a big change.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just using Zod 4 here, but I'll also show that I actually specifically opt into it. So here you do have stuff like greater than, less than, positive, all these kinds of things on number, and you also have integer. And here you have restrict to safe or restrict to at int32. So, there's even big ints and stuff like that. So as mentioned, if I just scroll a little bit here,
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
there's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah, quickly just
Um,
go strings. I just want to see if they did add. Yeah, like it doesn't seem like I really don't know why they don't have it. Like there's no validation to check, but like I just use a third party tool when I want to do that.
you
But it yeah.
you can also coerce to a number.
No, but you don't want to. So the specific case that I'm
Mm,
thinking about is I have a form where we're doing VAT registration number. And
mhm,
like, so that is once again, that's a classic example where it's not actually a number, it's a string, but it may only contain numbers. So if you add a character
mhm,
in there, you're probably doing there's probably a typo.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and I think it's just called validate. So like for that specific purpose, I'm pulling in a third party library, which is, it's so
mhm.
strange to me. I'd be really curious why, like it seems like there's a lot of, if you go to string, sorry, I'm going on a full on tangent now, but this is something I've always wondered about Zod is, you can do stuff as complex as checking whether something starts with triple
Mhm.
A, but you can't check whether, or you can, I guess, with regex, but like it's just strange
Yeah.
that you have to type that regex yourself. There isn't like something that's string numeric or something.
Mm, mm, mm,
I've always
mm.
wondered about that, but sorry, I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, no, 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 that's good. And also, just on the side of the input type number, I know people do that oftentimes because on mobile devices, they want the little number pad to show up. So you can get that without that by using the input mode attribute on the element. So you say input mode equals numeric, and then you'll get the number pad, even though you have input type text.
I maybe have another like kind of a question just to kind of throw your curveball, but I guess this is what you get for not having slides. Is now you can't be like, oh, we need to move on to the next slide. I mean, like now this is what you get. So so the reason why I don't generally use type number is I know that GDS kind of like advises against it. So that would be
Mhm,
gov.uk. And they have a
mhm,
very long article on why they actually, and to me, GDS is kind of like the gold standard when it comes
100%.
to accessibility and when it comes to forms. Oh my word, like they are just like Adam Silver from GDS kind of wrote like to me like probably the canonical book on web forms, which is form design
Mhm,
patterns.
mhm.
And so if they say they avoid using type number, I'm not going to ask any questions. I'm just going to be like, cool, like you just tell me what to do, and I'll do whatever you do. I trust you.
Yeah, for
I'm
sure.
so yeah, like I'm curious whether, because you also now did mention a couple of times, you generally kind of avoid it. Like for example, if you want the keyboard, there are ways to do it without setting it to type number. I'd be curious what your
Mm.
reasoning is for avoiding it.
Basically the same thing, really.
Okay.
Having read the spec, and the spec says even though it's called type number, it's not really meant for anything that is kind of sort of looks like a number. It's
Mm,
very specific when you want to indicate that there's some mathematical operation going to be done on this data
yes.
when it
Mm,
reaches the server. It's more of a signal than anything else. I guess you can do that with any other field, basically because the spec warrants you not to do that. So I'm like, cool, I will not. Especially with input mode, right? With input mode, you can get the little numeric input, which is nice on a mobile. You don't have all the characters to futz with if you just want to input, I don't know, a phone number or something like that. So yeah, but I have no other reasons, and I agree. Whatever the UK Gov thing does, yeah, they've thought about it. I recently read a thing where they talked about this exit page thing. So for people who you're reading something, but you're in a very distressing situation and you might just have to quit the page at any call. So a lot of pages have this like quick exit key combination, and they had this whole write-up about how they chose the key combination that they ended up with. So yes, they think through what they do. They don't just make a call. They do use the testing and the whole 9 yards. It's super great resource. Okay.
I'll maybe just share a link if someone here doesn't know what we're talking about. So GDS stands 100%. For Government Digital Services, and they kind of basically do the entire all the digital stuff like related to the UK. So renewing your kind of like driver's license, whatever, submitting your taxes, whatever. So they kind of consider it as the gold standard for any type of like form stuff. The other one as well is, interesting enough, Taiwan as well. I think they have like what's called like 0.gov or something.
Yeah,
those are kind of like
incredible.
the two. If you like, you can just imagine how many forms get submitted through like the UK's governmental services every single day online. But yeah, I'll share a link. Go ahead. Sorry. I'll maybe also quickly just read up on why the crux of why they say to avoid it. But I'll let you continue with your Zod stuff.
Yeah, 100. Okay, so right, so that we look through it, and then for example, the accept privacy policy thingy. This is a Boolean, and I'm passing it over. I'm formatting it because generally you get on or off when you do a checkbox. And so I'm just doing a little bit of data formatting to turn it into a Boolean. So this is kind of the payload that we expect. Some things might be present, some things might be missing, but this is kind of, so if you think about the payload, you could also call it a schema. And that word is going to come back in a second once we jump into the code for Zod. I just want to show you something in the HTML real quick. So, and it's around naming of the fields. So more often than not, if I, for example, set the name, the value of a name attribute, I always have done it like all lowercase with a dash between it like that, today. Now, the reason why I'm doing it like this is because I'm going to use this to my advantage in JavaScript. And in JavaScript, we tend to use this kind of casing. So now, because I don't want to mess between the two different casings, I'm going to use this. And where I use this is, you'll see, for example, let me search for error. Oop, no, field, no, error, message, but not that one. Did I call it something else? Field error, there we go. So you'll see here that I use the name and then I append error. And I do that everywhere. So postal code, error. So now if I have the ID, and we'll see whether it's so name or ID, and we get this back from Zod, because Zod tells us the field's an error and we get the name. So because we have that, we can use that and append error, and we automatically can get the right output where we want to put our error into. And so that is one thing I wanted to mention. And of course, all this code I'll stick on GitHub and share the links and all that kind of good stuff. So that is the only thing really that I wanted to mention here. We're going to come back to the HTML in a second, because there's some stuff with error messages that I want to talk about. But before we do that, let's jump into request form. Okay, so I'm using a pattern here, which is basically I turned the whole form, I wrapped it in a custom element called request form. And the reason I did that is purely because I really like the syntax structure that you get when you write like custom elements. You get your class, which is your request form. You extend the HTML element. You have your constructor that just calls super. And then in connected callback, you call whatever. You kick things off. In my case, I'm going to add some event listeners. And then at the end, I just register or define my request form custom element so the browser knows what it is. And it calls my class and instantiates it. And connected callback is called, it's basically one of the lifecycle events. And essentially, as soon as your component or your custom element is mounted in the DOM, this function is called. And so very first thing, call add event listeners. And so depending on how familiar you are with JavaScript, you might wonder, like, is this a naming convention to add the hash in front of the name? No, this is actually how you make private variables or private functions within a class syntax. But there's still
Real
a thing,
private, not fake private.
yeah. So this is a private function that's only available to the class. If you instantiate this class and you try to call this function, it will not exist. If you want that, you have to drop the hash off. But this is only for use within this function, so I don't want to expose this publicly, so it just lives in here. And the first thing is I use this because now I'm inside my custom element, and I know my form lives in here, so that's why I'm not using document, but I'm using this. This refers to my custom element. So we're only querying within my custom element. That's something else. It's nice. You kind of get scoping for free. If we don't have a form for some weird reason, we're just going to return. The next thing I do is I put no validate true on the form because I'm taking over. So I'm telling the browser, I know you can do some of this stuff, but it's all good. I'm going to take over so you don't validate anything. And I only do this if JavaScript's available, so that if JavaScript isn't available, at least we can fall back to something that the browser can do for us by, like, some fields have got required on them and that kind of thing. Then, so this is not really relevant for us right now, but this is just a little function that handles change events. And once you select South Africa, so once the country field changes, if you select South Africa, we make the province required and we enable it. If you don't select, or you then select a different country, we will just disable it again and mark it as not required. So that's all that this does. Where the interesting things start is over here. So here's our submit event. So we're binding onto that. And whenever that happens, we're going to prevent default because we're taking over again. And the first thing is we just use the form data, which is one of the coolest things in the web platform. You just throw it a form and it gives you the form data back. Whoopie-doo. That's it. Nothing funny to do. But of course, everything is strings. You have to use .get, or as we'll see in a moment, there's some other ways you can do that. We'll get back to the reset field errors in a second. We'll first jump into format data because I want to format the data a little bit before we head off to Zod. So I do an object.fromEntries, and I pass in my form data, and now I get a nice object that is just everything that's in my form with my key and then my value. So with that, I can use the hasOwn function, which basically is hasOwn property, but that's the newer one. This one is meant to replace the older one. So going forward, you should use object.hasOwn. So because some of these things might not be in the form, I only want to do stuff with them if they're there. So if form entries contains sample type, then I'm going to call this get all. Otherwise, what you'll get is only the last one. So if somebody checked 3 things and you just do object.fromEntries, you're only going to get the last of the ones they selected. Get all will return everything for you as an array. And then I basically overwrite what I had with my new values. Then I check, did the user select either a tour day or a preferred time? And if they did, I basically set this private property of the class to true, which says include roastery tour. So yeah, they selected something. They might have selected a day and a time, but I need to validate this now because they should have selected both. Then here is the only thing where I basically say, if the object contains accept privacy policy, this is just going to now tell me that, yes, the person checked it or they didn't. So it's not present. I get false back, and I set that as my accept privacy policy. And then because the phone number is optional, but it's not disabled, we will get phone, but it'll be an empty string. So just to clean up the data a little bit, I just say, if form entries.phone.trim is just an empty string, then just delete it from the object because we don't need it. And I return a form entries. So just a little bit of form data. How much of this you need to do is going to depend on your specific situation and the form that you're working with. This is a relatively complex form, so there's a bit of massaging that we want to do. So now with our data massaged, we'll just log out using console.table, just log out our formatted so we can see exactly what our formatted will look like. And then we're heading over to Zod. And we're passing two things to our function. We're passing our formatted data and we're passing our Boolean. That's telling us whether the user has included a roastery tour or they haven't included a roastery tour. So let's jump over there. 3 lines, but there's a lot more above. So let's go to the top. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import Zod. And as I mentioned, I'm opting into v4 by saying Zod/v4. So now I'm getting everything that's in v4. Then, as I mentioned before, when we looked at our JSON, I said, that's a schema. And this is exactly what we're going to be doing. We were going to be creating schemas in Zod and then validating our schemas to say, does our schema match the shape that we're interested in or that we're expecting? But before I jump into that, I want to kind of cycle back a little bit because one thing that you can do with Zod is you can give it custom error messages, which is often something you want. Like maybe you don't just want a default, this field is required a bazillion times across your form. You might want to be more specific because in Zod, you know the context in which the error happened. You know that it's not the email is missing or invalid, or you know that it's the last name or blah, blah, blah. So you might want to be a bit more specific. But that brings in the question of, but I don't just support English. I support English in 5 other languages. What do I do? Well, there's a couple of options. So Zod gives you pretty darn nice error messages by default. And with the latest, with v4, they've worked on this even more to create even fancier messages than before. I just want to get, here we go. So if you do prettify error.
This is neat. I don't know about this. This is really cool.
Yeah, so now you get even prettier stuff. So it would say, for example, unrecognized key, extra key, or invalid input, expected string, received number. So it's a little bit more user friendly.
Yes,
and if
I had to do a lot of this manually with 3.
Yeah.
And like, so I think there were like third-party libraries that you could use to kind of convert it into something prettier. But it, yeah, like, and I think it also by default returned an array of errors. So this is really cool. So you needed like some third-party stuff if you want a lot of this to happen automatically. But I kind of just did it myself. But this is really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's like flatten error. So that's the one that I use. So just kind of make that big object with more data than you might need, and it just squishes it, make it a little bit easier to
What
work
does
with.
it do? Oh, okay. It still gives you multiple errors. Then.
Yeah, but it just cleans it up, essentially,
Okay.
flattens it a bit.
Yeah.
Find it a little bit easier to work with. Not that the original one isn't, but yeah. So it gives you some things out of the box. And if you're happy with them, then actually it has internationalization, and they're building on this. And you can, for example, say import English from Zod locales. And now it's going to give you your messages in English. And they support currently only a few languages. Some of them is not, but that's a contribution opportunity.
Die integer nummer 4 is uitstaande.
Hey man, this is a great, maybe some people want to contribute to this. This is a great contribution opportunity. But there's a lot of languages. I know some of these are much more cooked, as they say, than other ones. But, you know, this has already grown since I've looked at it the last time. So if you use the default, you use the prettify, you might even get away with just using this and you're A for away. Right now, for example, the UX company that we work with, and then the client on one of the projects, they're kind of particular about the messages they want. So they want specific strings. They also want to be able to translate it themselves. And so we're in that scenario, we're in this Drupal world. So they translate stuff in the Drupal CMS, and then on page load, so let me show you how we do it at the moment. We set a bunch of, we basically set this PHP object inside the twig. So we use twig for templating. And in the at the top of it, we set like an object called, for example, form error messages. And then it's just an object with a bunch of keys and values. And the values are the error messages. But those error messages is in the language of the current user. So if they're DE, it will be in German. If it's French, it'll be in French, English, So we create a little object like that, and then we spit it out into the DOM. Here I did it manually. So there we go. So we split it out into a script tag that we set the type to application JSON. And so the browser will just be like, and it'll just ignore it. And it'll leave it in there. And it's just a string. It's just like JSON.stringify your object, turns it into a string. And then what we do is in our validator, right at the top, we query for that DOM element. If it exists, we parse that string into an object, and voila, we've got our error messages in the language that we needed. Next time we reload the page, or if we maybe change your language, the page will reload and PHP will send us our new strings. We'll just get a new one, and we're all good. So, in some instances, we even store this in session storage, so we don't have to do this every time. We check is it in session storage? Yep, we just read it from there. So we don't have to do the parsing and everything each time the page loads. So now we have our object, and we can pick the messages that we want off of it. I just wrote them here in a little JSON file that I just stringified then, but you can see, for example, what the format looks like. So we have a specific error message for when the title is required, first name, last name, email, but then we also have like a general required field. This field is required. Maybe that's good enough sometimes. So this is essentially what's being stuck in the HTML that we then read back and turn into an object so we can then use it, like, for example, here. So here, almost all of your Zod validation kind of functions like enum, string, email, takes a custom error message, either as just the message you're passing in, or the parameter argument you're passing in, or as the second argument, almost all of them. You can also do this kind of thing if it's a field that accepts more options. You can also do this kind of deal, right, where you pass it explicitly as the error. So that's also an option you can do. For here, I'm cool with that, so I just did that. Now, here we hit our first interesting thing. You might think I'm talking about the array, but actually I'm not. I'm talking about the fact that I've split this up into multiple schemas. Why in the world would I do that? Well, because now you kind of have a composable schema, because maybe tomorrow you're like, I have a very simple form actually that I'm just getting a person's title, first, last name, and email address with an optional phone number. Well, then you just use the schema by itself. And for example, you will see that well, let me not jump forward too much. So this is why I broke it up. I broke it up into these concrete kind of things that I can imagine myself I'd like to compose into more complex or more simple forms in the future. So this is why I did that. And of course, now Zod gives you the ability to do that. It doesn't force you to create one big schema every time for each and every form, because you can combine these, and we'll see a little later how you do that. Then the very first field is title. Now, you might not want to do this for each and every select dropdown. Think country, for example. But for this one, it's a pretty small set of potential options. Also, this right now, I hard-coded this, but ideally, you would, again, because of localization, you might want to get this from the server and do maybe the same kind of trick that I'm doing with the error messages to get these kind of field values out. And then you would just dump it in. Now, here's a caveat with the just dump it in part. Be careful, because if you take this array over here and you store it as a variable, and you pass the variable into z.enum, then when you do a thing that we will do a little bit later, when you take your schema and convert it to a TypeScript type, it won't be able to properly infer what these values are. And you probably will, maybe it'll just fall back and say, it has to be a string. but you lose some of this strong
Yeah.
typing here.
I don't know how you get around it in plain JavaScript, but in TypeScript, if you set it as you said, if you do it as const, then it would
Mm,
still work. So if you do as const, or you
yes.
do, I think, read only. I think.
Yeah, as const will
Um,
100% work.
yes.
They also mention it here. Let's
I
have a
don't
quick
know. I don't
look.
know how you would do that in plain JavaScript, unless you are doing like
You know,
a JS doc type annotation or something.
yeah,
But
maybe,
yeah,
maybe. So again, depending on your setup, this might be useful. But to be fair, you lose some really strict typing versus you still get something, because you could say z.string and it will make sure that it's a string. You won't be able to be as specific as I'm being here, but at least you know it's a string. It's not a number or
yeah.
something.
So yeah, unfortunately, the problem with JavaScript is there's no way to create an actual constant. So you have the const, but that just makes
Hmm.
the reference constant.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
there's
yeah.
no way to create an array and say that like you're not allowed to change this array at a later point, which like that's unfortunately the problem. In TypeScript you
Yeah.
can do that by saying as const, but in plain
Hmm.
JavaScript, so it can't ever really conclusively say what that array is going to be
Yeah,
unless you
exactly.
declare it inside the function itself, because if you pass it directly into the function, there's no way of,
Hmm.
because of scope, there's no way of changing that after the fact. Yeah, unfortunately.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm.
And here is in the documentation, here it is where it says or use as const. Always pass the array directly or use as const if you're in a TypeScript world. So that is why I pass it directly in here. But what this basically will do is it will not only check that what you pass in here is a string, but that it's exactly one of these values. Now, you might think, well, I mean, z.string would be more than good enough because, I mean, it's a select dropdown. How in the world are you going to be able to send anything that's not in that? Curl. Curl, if you know the endpoint. You can hack things by passing stuff because, again, remember, one of the powers here is that we can use this. We can share this between our front end code and, for example, our netlify function. And we'll see that in a little bit.
Yeah.
So that is
The
why
other
you.
thing, yeah, the other thing is as well is like, like the big problem, and which is why I like I usually say that TypeScript's my least favorite like typed language, because
Mhm.
it extends JavaScript, so it inherits all of the problems that JavaScript has. And so one of the things is like the main thing, the main kneecapping thing is like the fact that you can just change prototypes in JavaScript. So sure, you're saying like, yeah, no, select, but there's a big asterisk, which is like you can literally just go and override how the on-change works. So it can't conclusively say, because it doesn't know if you maybe just went and overrid the prototype, and the prototype now just always returns Schalk Neethling instead of whatever you select. So
Mm, mm, mm.
that's unfortunately the problem, like. And then so it's not only curl, it's like just like you can just there's just like so much shenanigans in the browser
Yep.
that you can't really say anything conclusively.
Yeah. No, very true.
Yeah.
And and to that point, also because you could have this more stricter schema, so to speak, or not so to speak. There's more. You can have a more strict schema. Maybe if you feel that that is needed for when you're in TypeScript. So say, for example, your netlify function is written in TypeScript, but here you have JavaScript. Then here you could say, just make sure it's a string and that it's required. That something is selected. But then you could have you can compose a separate schema that you use on your TypeScript side where this is using the as enum, so that you can have this outside, so you don't have to like you get past this problem we just discussed.
And so just also quickly another thing, like, sorry, I'm
Hmm.
interrupting now quite a bit,
No, go
but
for
like
it.
as I mentioned, this is your punishment for not creating slides. So you can't tell me I'm going off course, because there is no roadmap. So like
There's no roadmap.
yeah, so like everything's within scope. So so one thing though is like because so generally, like the reason why you would do that, the reason why you would maybe declare it outside, is if you maybe now want to map over those options to create your select. So now you have to
Yes.
retype it again. But
Yeah.
what you can do is you can do it the other way around. You can extract that array from Zod.
Yep.
So you can go
Yep.
personal information schema. I think it's dot shape, dot
Hmm.
title, and then I think it's dot options. And that gives you the array back. So
Yep.
like you can do it this way without creating it outside of Zod and then just extract it out of Zod if you need it as an actual array somewhere.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Cool. And then, of course, we're passing in our custom error message here if our validation fails. And then we're just doing a couple of string things. So we're just saying we expect this is always tricky with first names and last names. I'm saying 3 characters, but then automatically Asian languages, this is going to fail for somebody called Joe. And that's just J-O. Suddenly their name is invalid. So this is a really tricky one, but I wanted to throw something in here that shows you can set a min. I thought you wanted to add something to that.
No,
That's
it's just
always,
ridiculous. Like I understand this is like a contrived example, but like my brain just looking at that is like just like, dude, this is so problematic. Like
yeah, no, for sure. That's why I wanted to mention that beforehand. And then we get to email. And here's the cool thing. Z.email. It's going to validate your email. The thing that is important to note here, and you can go and read this. Let me just find it. I think here we go. Here is the regular expression that's used to validate your email. And if you want to know why it is that, you can read the post from Colin Hacks, who wrote Zod. It's an email regex for reasonable people. So it will not catch everything, but for reasonable people, this should be good enough. So again, it's right there. If you feel like, if you understand the entire regular expression here and you're like, I think I can do better, you're welcome to use your own regex. You don't have to use z.email, but for most reasonable people, this is going to be good. And so that'll then again return our custom error message if email failed. And the
there's
rest is
also
pretty much,
there's
yep,
also another point to that, which is like you as a rule of thumb, you wanna err on the side of like flexibility.
yes,
So the experience of making a typo and that not being caught compared to the experience of having a valid email that doesn't want to pass validation is catastrophic.
yeah,
Which is like honestly, I tend to kind of oscillate a bit here, but at this point I'm kind of at the point where I'm like I don't do any validation on phone numbers
yeah, for
because
sure.
like I rather, if I really want to make sure it's a valid phone number, I'd rather do it by means of like an OTP process.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just
Mm-hmm.
like I've just worked on so many systems where like you get this 1, 2, 3, 10 customers who just saying like they can't, like their phone number isn't working, and then for
Yeah.
some reason there's something there that you haven't thought about. There's some weird government like switchboard thing, or they have like a
Mm,
really old
mm,
phone, or who the hell knows. It's like, or they're calling from some country that there's always something with phone numbers. I
yeah,
think emails,
agreed.
I've rarely found any problems with emails, but then you're like, okay, it's Schalk, but you know, like how then do people, what if people want to like do international codes, or would they know if they should just do 074 or whether they should do, you know, plus 2774? It's like, but tell them, give them an
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
example. Say,
Yeah, exactly.
please provide a phone number, for example.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like
yeah.
there's okay. I yeah. Okay. I don't want to throw someone under the bus because I'm literally working for them right now, redesigning all their user flows.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very big, it's kind of a very big like South African company. Their current phone validation throws an error if you have spaces in your phone number.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I know. But it's what's amazing about working on those type of things is like you're like really like yo man, I can make such a big difference here. And it is unfortunately, it's a lot of it is just like they have a team of backend developers, and it's like someone had to do the UI, because it's a fintech institution, so it's like
Gotcha.
yeah, they just have like a ton of people who write like COBOL and whatever, and it's like I can probably do some bootstrap UI or something, but
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
digress. Yes, but
No,
like
no,
that's a
no.
good example. It's so annoying. Like like
For
it
sure.
failing if you have spaces in your email, but in your phone number. But yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I've encountered some companies who don't allow the plus blah 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 before the at sign because they want to prevent people from doing multiple signups. So you can do the classic. It used to be a Gmail thing, but you can configure pretty much any email server. So you have your default email address, and then in between your normal piece and the at, you can put plus and whatever. Like you used to use that to figure out when people sell your data, because when you sign up to a site, you can do somebody plus site name at gmail.com. So if tomorrow you get an email from somebody else, but it has that email, you're like, where did you get that email? You got it from that company, you buggers. And so, you can
Uh,
kind of like protect yourself that
yeah.
way.
You know what you also use that for? To create lots of free accounts on the same service without reaching
Yeah,
the cap.
exactly. That's why they disallow that one. So you might need a
What?
custom email
Who said?
validation.
Who said something?
You say the quiet part out loud. um, And then we have a couple of other things, which is just normal strings with some minimums, with custom. And these all just use required field, just as an example. So they don't get specific. And then for our roastery tour schema, we again have these very specific things. Monday, Tuesday, again, problematic if you have localization things. So you might want to here allow a string and on your server side, be more specific. So people can't sneak in something dodgy. And again, providing custom error messages. And so here we get to our first situation where we're kind of doing the composing of it. So now we have our request form schema. So the only thing that we don't have a separate schema for, and we could create a separate one on one of the projects at work, they have 3 checkboxes that's related to privacy, but only one is required. But still, there's 3 of them. So for that, we have a separate little privacy schema because again, that's reused in other places, so we can compose it. But for this time, I just inlined it here. The thing is, I'm sending a Boolean over, right? I'm not sending on or off or something like that. By the way, talking about on or off, there's a new thing called string bools that's new in Zod 4. And that basically takes certain strings and it knows that that is probably true and that this string is probably false. And so you don't have to do the data
that
wrangling.
that that's really cool, but there's something in me that's like, that's a bad idea. It feels very like a very bad idea, but
It could go wrong.
because like someone's gonna have something where the Y in their first name or whatever like is converted to a Boolean, or I think I've just been
I,
burned by like type coercion, like just too
yeah, yeah,
much
yeah.
in JavaScript that like when I see this type of thing, immediately I get the heebie-jeebies of it. But it's cool, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the reason why they mention it specifically in the context of environmental variable parsing, because I didn't mention that at the start, but I might as well mention it now. So Zod is for data validation. It doesn't have to be forms data that you're validating. It's data that you're validating against some kind of schema. So what some projects and companies do is you have a .env file, and that contains a whole bunch of things you need to run the project. But maybe you've been on holiday for 2 weeks or 3 weeks and you come back and you start up your project and it fails and you're like, why is it not working? Turns out while you were away, they added 1 or 2 new environmental variables, or they took away 1 or 2. now you have to start asking around. What you can do with this is you can run that through Zod, and Zod will tell you, oh, you're missing this and these, you're missing these two keys, and this is what is expected. And you can be like, oh, okay, cool. It's probably in the README. Let me go see, and you can go
And you
fix
can't
it.
do you can't do true, like everything everything in a env is a string. So yeah,
Yeah.
in that case, you like that's a good example. And I know like Xandor used to be very big on this idea of actually like uh, running your .env through Zod out of
Mm-hmm.
principle, because you know Zod
Mm-hmm.
is for any type of data that comes from the outside world into your
Yes.
runtime.
Yeah.
And yeah, that would classify as, you know, a env file or
Mm-hmm.
some random JSON file that you're just like, because you can now actually import straight into, you can import
Yep.
JSON straight into um, yeah, so like which actually brings me to the next topic. Like I don't know if you've played around with Astro at all, or like how
Yep.
Astro uses Zod. Like it's
Yeah. Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like good on them. Like they took a lot of flack for saying Astro is a TypeScript now.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like you have to use TypeScript,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that was the right call, because like just the magic of setting Zod schemas for your collections,
Oh yeah, that's
and like,
super.
oh, so saying that this is the schema of, for example, a blog post or whatever, and then
Mm-hmm.
just always having that like structure when you're importing or you're creating a layout for a blog post or whatever, having that guarantees in terms of what is the structure here, what can you access, is amazing, and
Yeah.
you declare that through Zod as well in
Yeah.
Astro.
So
Mm.
if you use Astro and you ever see the Z dot, that is Zod that they're using under the hood. Because I
Interestingly
think when you,
enough, they've probably forked it to
it
make it
might
just,
be,
yeah, because they
yeah.
re-export it, which I've always found interesting. Is kind of like you
Mm,
import Z from Astro. They don't.
yeah,
It's not a peer
exactly.
dependency. So I think they maybe forked it and just made some slight changes so it plays nicely with the Astro platform. But yes, that Z is. I've sometimes accidentally pulled in real Zod, and
Mm-hmm.
it seemed to just not cause any issues. So I think there's maybe like some super edge cases where they just had to fork it and make some slight changes to make it play nicely with Astro. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's amazing. So because I'm sending a Boolean, I don't have to rely on that or coerce or anything. But then you do use this little refine function, which basically just says, I'm getting a value in, make sure it's true. If it isn't, then here's again. You can see where I use the object and I say, here's my message. So
Uh,
if,
what one of my favorite parts about Zod is super refine.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's like refine, and then there's a method called super refine, which
Super
is
refine,
amazing.
yeah. And then we have our catalog type. And here you can see, so our catalog type can be an array. So it can be, because you can select two things, and so it'll array with two strings. So we're saying here, we expect this to be an array of type strings, so strings, but then we use optional. But it's cool if there's nothing, just ignore it, and we can move right along. And then here's where we compose our bigger schema. We compose it by spreading our previous schema and then just putting dot shape at the end. So what we get on the other side, so we have to throw this in a z dot object. Otherwise, you don't have a Zod object. You just have a plain JavaScript object. And then if you try to call functions on it, it's going to say, oh, well, I don't know, that function doesn't exist. So you can create a new Zod object from others, and you would normally spread them and do dot shape like I have here, or you can add just some additional properties that's not common among the others. And out of that, we have our full form schema now. So, but as I mentioned, the thing is, sometimes we don't have the tour stuff, and then we don't want that mucking up all our stuff. We don't want this. This might seem familiar to people who do TypeScript. Emit. They have emit, they also have pick. But all I'm saying here is use the request form schema, but omit tour day and preferred time. Leave those out and keep everything else in. And as simple as that, we've created a sub, what is it? A a sliced version of our previous one. Great stuff. We can move on. Now, if we go right down, now we're kind of back to where we were in the beginning. The thing is here, though, we want to do, there's more complexity here. Because yes, we're saying with to or without. So with that, we can get our schema that we want to use. Do we want to use the full request form schema or the request form without tour schema? But we have one more thing, because we could have a province, because somebody might have selected South Africa and now we have a province. So at this point, we need to amend our schema a little bit again. And to do that, I have a function that's enable province validation if required. I give it the data and I give it my schema. So I have my base schema and then I call this function. And this does the thing that I've done before, object.hasOwn. Do we have a province? Because if it wasn't required, it would have been disabled and it wouldn't be part of our object. So if it's there, it is required. So then we take our base schema and we extend it. And we just add our province and we say it's a string, minimum of 2. And we're sure about that because we maybe know that provinces can't be shorter than 2. And if it's 2 or less, then we want to return a error, but a custom error. And we just return that. If it wasn't, we'll just return the schema that you passed in. So nothing changes. But now if province is required, it's added to the schema for validation. And then we call return validate schema. And this is kind of where the magic happens. So, and maybe you can chime in here, Schalk, because you can parse your data in 2 ways. You can call save parse, as I do here, or you can call parse. But if you call parse, it'll throw. So you want to do that inside a try catch. I have not really encountered a situation where I felt I needed to use parse over save parse. So I just always use save parse, and it returns a result that contains some information about the error. With a try catch, you get the same information, but it comes back as a Zod error. So in your catch, you can look for, is the error a type of Zod error? And if it is, you can do some custom handling in there, or then do whatever if it's a different kind of error. But I'm not entirely sure when you would be forced to use that over using safe parse. I don't know if you've encountered.
I can give you like 100% like solid answer. Like when you're doing any type of API validation.
Okay.
So like if you know, like if you're validating your HTTP responses. So I tend to
Okay.
I tend to ascribe to more to kind of the offensive programming side of things, which sounds a lot more badass. It's like offensive programming, but it's kind of like it's a bit of a reaction to overly defensive programming, which is to me, if you agreed, if you have a contract, and like I don't even want to get into like Open API to Zod converters, man, like that has changed my life. So you have an open API contract between yourself and the backend team, and you work with that, and I validate my Zod against that contract. So when I call the HTTP request, I validate what comes back. If it doesn't like conform to the contract, I'm just gonna throw. I'm just gonna be like, backend team, you gone goofed up. Figure something out. I'm not going to go and be like, why now? If I click this button, like now all of a sudden it's incrementing by 2 and then by 7 and by like what? And I go in my front end code and I'm like, hey. And then I figure out like the API is completely bonkers and it doesn't actually work the way it was typed up.
Gotcha.
So I tend to be really hardcore in terms of I Zod like everything that comes into the app. And if anything is not what we agreed, I'm just going to throw. And if someone asks, like, why is the app breaking? What's going on? Well, I don't know. Speak to the backend team. The API is not doing what it's supposed to do. No, I'm not going to like, because that's the problem is like, you know, like if you program overly defensively, then what's going to happen is because someone else messed up, and like now it's actually flowing through your system. First, it's so hard to debug, figuring out where's this problem coming from, and secondly, now downstream, that is going to cause other bugs in your system. That's going to be your responsibility, and you're going to be the one that's
Yeah,
like,
fair enough.
why when someone said they want to transfer 10 rand to a bank account, why is it now transferring R1 million? You know, like, so like if you're so yeah, interestingly enough, I tend to actually use parse more than save parse.
Interesting.
Because I obviously, as I said, everything that comes into my app, I'm just like parsing that, and I'm making the app explode if it's not working. Yeah.
I might still throw, but I would do save parse, and if the result wasn't a success, I might throw. If I don't have a what's the word I'm looking for?
Are you talking
I'm
about
going to say
for validation, or what are you talking about? Are you talking about
yeah.
APIs?
To some extent,
Okay.
APIs.
I hear what you're saying. Oh, interesting. That's interesting because I would actually do I would actually do the opposite. I would actually consider always doing parse and catching if, and then deciding whether I want to actually throw the, because like the other thing is, keep in mind that the thing is with, so one of the things with parse is if you throw, you can catch that at multiple levels.
Yeah.
So you can
true.
decide where you want to catch it. If you do save parse, it's you get that value at that exact level. But if you want to, if like for example, like over here, if you want to, you don't know where this is going to be caught. You don't know, is this part of what bigger thing is this part of? Should this be like, is this like maybe, especially when you're doing this type of composition, is there like a selector, and when you select the wrong thing, it should immediately give an error? Or is it part of a selector and the error should be higher up somewhere? Or
Yeah,
that's one of the
fair,
benefits,
fair.
because if you just throw, you're just like, I don't know what's going to happen to this value. I'm just telling this thing is incorrect. And then you can always, and this is also like sometimes I would just throw as well, and then do a conditional catch. I'd catch and I'd see what the error is, and then I decide, do I want to intercept it?
Gotcha.
So that's
Makes
also
sense.
nice if you want to account for like other types of errors as well. You know, so like maybe like, yeah, like maybe something else is happening that's not like, then you can bundle your validation with other types of errors as well, and so forth.
Yeah,
But yeah,
create like
like,
custom errors and stuff.
yeah, but I think safe pass is just, it's a quality of life thing. But it's interesting. Like my way of thinking about it is, I would actually rather throw and catch that, and yours is the opposite. You would rather safe parse and then throw if needed. That's interesting.
Yeah,
There's two
maybe
different
it's
ways of,
the
yeah.
I mean, I think I tend to be more defensive, so maybe that's the difference. I don't know. Maybe that's the difference. And
I've
then
just
I
been
used
burned
it
too
in
many
flat mirror.
times. I've just been burned too many times. I've just been burned too many times by allowing things that shouldn't. Like, sorry, I should maybe not go into too much of another tangent. I don't know if you've kind of used effect, like, so not use effect, use effect, the effect library.
Oh no.
It's really great. I'm loving it so much. It's for me a very nice compromise between functional programming and kind of like the imperative mumbo
Okay.
jumbo that comes with React and TypeScript. But like, what's really cool about that is like they make a clear distinction between errors and defects. So
Okay.
error is something that is, so the server being down. That's an error. Okay.
Yeah.
It's something it's something wrong. Like, but you're accounting for that. That can happen. Defects is just like, I didn't even consider this thing. So yeah, so errors are like, it's interesting that they kind of make that distinction between defects and errors. And errors are things that can go wrong, that are errors. Like, they should probably have severe implications. Either you reload the browser or you try again later, but you can foresee that is something that can possibly happen. Whereas defects is just like, I didn't even take this into account. And I kind of like that approach as well. So to me, it's like validation, errors, defects. Like that to me is kind of like the level of things that go wrong.
Yeah,
yeah.
I'll definitely check that out. That sounds really interesting. Okay, so yeah, and then I just use flatten error. Yeah, you don't have to. It just, for me, I've this gives me all the information I need. Like I don't need anything additional. So, and I don't really even need to do a little object thingy like this. Maybe maybe you've convinced me to do parse, but for now, let's follow what I have here. And so that brings us back to our result. And so now we're saying that if it wasn't successful, so something is not right, then I just log the field errors. But out of validation.errors, we can get our field errors. And that is all our individual form fields. And then all we do is we loop over our field errors. And our property, we know, is the ID of the input that was an error. Now, there's a catch here, because if it was a field set that has multiple, this will not be an actual field. And that's why there's a check here before we try to mark something as ARIA invalid. But be that as it may, we get the field, and then we do the little trick. So we do property and we append error to it. So we know that's where we want to stick our error message into. And then that said, we say field error.text content is the value. And instead of it being hidden, so our errors uses the hidden attribute in HTML. So it's hidden. So we just toggle that to not be hidden. So now it shows up. And then if we got a field, then we'll set it to ARIA invalid true. And you might have some CSS that plays long, makes the border red or anything like that. And it returns, because of course we can't continue to submit the form. If everything was good, we'll go ahead and we'll submit things to the server. But now if we go back to our form, and let me just open this here. And so if I don't fill in anything and I just hit submit, you can see here we're getting all our custom error messages. Please enter your first name, last name, missing or invalid email address. And it's right by the field that was an error. But if you open here, there, it's told us that that one isn't there. And that is the reason that happened, is because I had this midday selected here. So if I hard refresh and I do submit again, and now we won't have any errors in here because this wasn't submitted, because you didn't choose anything. But as soon as you choose something, now we're going to validate that you've done something with the tour. Now, of course, you could make this better by saying if a user, for example, opens this up, makes a selection, and then later on says, actually, I don't want a tour, and they close it, you can uncheck everything that was checked in there, and then it won't submit it. So that is like one of those UX things I mentioned that I didn't get to, that you could do to improve the situation. But, it gives us everything here. And as soon as you submit, because we have this error field, we just call reset field errors. And it basically gets all the field errors in our form. If there was nothing, don't do anything. If it was, it just sets it back to empty strings, removes the ARIA invalid. I read somewhere that's better to remove it than to set it to false. So I'm just removing it, hiding them again so they don't take up space in the DOM. And that's pretty much it. But you can also see here with our table thingies, you can clearly see here what has been set. There's our starter kit. So if we select, for example, all three of them, then now you can see we have our array of 3 items. And you can see all our other data that's been submitted and these ones. And here is the object we're looping over in our Zod errors. So you can see here's our key, and then our error message, our key and our error message, and so forth and so forth. So that is basically how you would set up your form validation. Now, as mentioned, you could then also use let's say you have this thing here at the back end. Your back end's your little Netlify serverless function that's handling your form submit. Well, you can pull in validate form. Maybe here the validate data would have been a better name, maybe. But you can do the exact same thing. So you're going to see if you had a request body, if everything was good. Now you get the JSON. And then you call that exact same function and you pass it your data that's now happening on a serverless function somewhere in the cloud. And you're calling your exact same function to do your data validation now. And now, again, this one could have been hit with curl or some other Bruno or one of these tools that you can use to just test your API endpoints.
Sorry, I'm just quickly going to interrupt. I just quickly need to go handle something, but I'll just leave this. Like, I'll be back in like 5 minutes. Okay, cool. But I'll just
Sounds
let you
good.
continue. Okay.
Cool. So same deal. You throw it to this exact same function. Now it's going to validate just the data you've passed in, because that's all it knows is there's some data. I need to validate it against the schema, and I need to tell you whether everything is as expected or not. If that comes from a form, or if that came from a post message that's now on a server somewhere, doesn't matter. It handles exactly the same. The difference here is this is MTS, so we're in TypeScript world here. So you will see, for example, that I have a type here called function response that just defines something. So we can say that's the kind of shape of the response that we will send. But the thing is, what if in here or somewhere else, if some of your other code was also TypeScript, what if you wanted to use some of these schemas as types? Like, do you now have to write them again? For example, do I now have to write request form and make that a type inside my TypeScript? No, you do not. For example, here I export request form schema, and I can export this one as well, for example, and I can import the schema here, right? And then I can do type request form equals z.infer type of, and then my request form schema. And just like that, voila, we have a request form type that we can use. And we can do the same thing with the other one. And then again, depending on our little Boolean value here, data with tour that we send along when we do our fetch, we can decide to use one or the other type. When we're saying like this data should be of this type, we can decide whether it should be a full request form type, or whether it can be, or you can of course just do the omit thing if you want to in your TypeScript as well. But you don't have to. You can do the exact same thing with this. You can import this and you can infer the TypeScript type from that. And you can do that with each one of these. And that is, if you look at this one over here, you will see that we're getting basically this, like, it has to be one of these values. Now, if it was a variable that we passed in, that is what Zod is saying. Like, if you do that, I won't be able to do this because I won't know. Unless, like what Schalk explained, if you do the whole thing if this was also TypeScript and you do the whole as const thingy, then it can infer and it can bring that with. So that is, you get your schemas, and from your schemas, you can do your validation against form input, against data, or you can do it, you can use that to create a TypeScript type. And of course, if my validated.js was validated.ts, I would have just exported my types from here. And then wherever in my code base I need my types, I can just import them from the same place. So that's the other thing that you get with Zod. Now, of course, you can open up your browser and you can fill in some information, skip some information, and then submit the form and see, oh, okay, yeah. So if I select Mr. here and I say, okay, cool. And if I say South Africa here, oh, now my province, and now submit. Oh, now it says, please enter your province. Okay, cool. This all works. But because we're just working with data, because we have data validates against the schema, we don't have to do this in the browser like that. We might want to do some Puppeteer or Playwright tests to make sure that our error messages actually show up and that the error message is the error message that we expect. We could do that. But again, that's an automated test. You do it once, you run it over and over again. And we can do the same with our validation. And we can do that through, in this case, I used Vitest. So I'm just going to look at a couple of tests here. And now you can be super verbose if you want. So validate with tour. So this is a full example that has your Mr. John Doe, blah, blah, blah. It also sets the tour day, the preferred time, everything. So when it does this, it says, I expect the result.success to be true. And then here should validate a complete valid form with tour and province. So this is the whole deal. It also brings in a province. Again, we're making sure that that succeeds. And now we're going to start going down the unhappy path. So it should reject it when some of the required. So here we have a missing last name. So we validate. We expect the success to be false, and we expect errors to be defined. And so we go on. We pass in an invalid email. We expect to be false. And of course, you can introspect this even more, right? To make sure that the error message or error messages that you expect to be there, that they are there. And here you can also do some string matching if you want to. But again, I feel like when you're testing the UI, you will do that with like Playwright, for example. Here we're just making sure if I give you this data, I expect this to come back. What is this one? Invalid title. So this is not Mr. or any of the available options, so it should
Talking
fail.
about coming back. Yeah, sorry. Like kids they're out of control. They don't want to go to bed.
Oh, I know that very well.
Yeah,
Not
so
anymore, but
yeah. So the wife went with like the nuclear option, which is like, I'm gonna tell dad.
So, and then for example, here you can see we're validating against, we're giving it a string. It's not empty, but invalid title is not one of those titles that we expect. It's not Mr. or Mrs. or she, he, or any of those. So we expect it to fail. Here, this is actually should be valid, but we talked about it. Joe should pass, but it's failing in this case. We're just making sure that our minimums are working. Our street is too short here, so we're testing that. Of course, you could test multiple things in one test, or you can make them individual, like here. Here, the person didn't accept the privacy policy, so expect to fail. Here, we're doing our validation, so we're dropping the tour, so we want to make sure it's using the correct schema, and our validation passes. And then here's just some real-world information. And then again here, but this is how you can write a whole bunch of different tests to basically test your schema. And here it's just basically creating a custom schema on the fly. And then it's checking if I pass that into the validate schema function, which is a generic function that just takes some data in a schema and validates the one against the other. And just making sure that that also works. So we have a very specific function down here called validate form, but we also have a generic one, which is just like, give me some data, give me a schema, and I will validate the two against one another, and I'll tell you whether it was successful or not. So here we're just doing that by basically constructing a custom schema on the fly and validating it, and doing the same thing here, but we're giving it some invalid data, and here we're passing some empty strings to just make sure it fails on those, some nulls to make sure it fails on those. And now, of course, if we go into our terminal and we do npm t, boom, as quick as that, we can see that 16 tests were run and they all pass. So at any time, if we change our schemas, our test will start failing and can be like, oh, what the heck is going on? Oh, damn it, yeah, this edge case, we forgot about that. So just like that, we now have, as I mentioned, you can use Playwright to do some tests on the UI if you want to maybe test, like I said, that those actual error messages show up, that they're visible and that they are the strings that you expect them to be. But you also have all your unit tests here to test, really throw some wacky data at your validation and at your schemas and make sure everything works. And like that, you have, I don't know, for me, this is so nice to use. And I haven't even scratched the surface of what's possible with this. And like I said, you don't have to use it just for form validation. It's just one that's, for me, been a complete game changer. So I've been singing the praises of Zod for a while now. And when this opportunity came up, I was like, yes, I must tell more people. You are missing out if you're not using Zod. So with that, I'll zip it up, and I hope that I'll Zod it. And I hope you learned something valuable. I sure as heck did when I first dove into this, and I can't wait to use it everywhere.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. Like if there's anything to take away from this, is that if you haven't tried out Zod, try it out. It's amazing. People tell me that about effect schema. It hasn't clicked for me just yet, but a lot of people tell me that like they now use that instead of Zod. So we'll see. Maybe I'll do a talk where I was like, yeah, I heard about this effect schema thing, and I didn't pay much attention. And then one day I tried it. But yeah, but like I think like Zod is like for what it's worth, without knowing necessarily that much about the alternatives or what might be better,
Hmm.
in itself, Zod is amazing. Um, I
Yeah.
have one quick question for you, and this is something while we're on the topic of like validation and so forth, have you ever at all used the native like input, like kind of error stuff? There is an actual API for
Oh,
that.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so like I so in the way that if it's an email, it shows you like not a valid email or
Yeah.
required or whatever. There is an API. I'm curious whether I've been wanting to play around with that for a while now, but I've just haven't had time or a good use case to actually dive into that. Um, yeah, I'm curious whether you have any experience with that, because it also seems like there's a good opportunity there in terms of Zod and kind of just creating some type of adapter layer where your Zod error just feeds into that direct, and you don't even have to worry about the styling or whatever, or valid or aria or whatever. Yeah.
That's so I have, and
Mm,
we on the one project that we're working on, we are/were kind of using it. So it's
mm,
this whole validity state thing,
mm,
where you can basically say when you submit a form, check the validity of the form, and then it will give you
mm,
very much kind of very loosely kind of like Zod. It would give you back a state of the form and tell you these things
mm,
aren't right. And it has, like, you can see these things like pattern
mm,
mismatch. If you used a pattern attribute, it'll tell you that didn't match, it was too long or too short, these kinds of things.
mm.
The thing that I'm still unsure about is the accessibility of native form
Mm.
validation.
Yeah.
Um,
Ironically
and
enough, like
yeah, and the thing is,
it's kind of sad that like we can't even trust like browsers themselves to present things in an accessible manner. But yeah.
yeah, and I mean, I tested a little bit of it on with VoiceOver on Mac, and
Mm,
funnily enough, the one that I found is the best by far is Chrome,
mm.
um, better than Safari. And
Safari used
generally,
to be
people,
kind of like the kind of the best
yeah.
one. Okay,
But
interesting.
then on Windows, the most common pairing for not JAWS, the other one, the open source one.
NVDA, yeah,
Yeah, NVDA. Yeah, the
yeah.
most common pairing for NVDA was Firefox, but that has changed also. That is also Chrome now, and I have a suspicion it has to do more to do with Chromium than
Mm,
Chrome, and I think it's all the work that Microsoft has been putting in on the Edge
mm,
team, because
mm,
I mean it's basically mostly thanks to them that you have the much nicer UI in for the default form inputs now, and more
What's
unified. As big,
what's the kind of working group? There's a name for it, but there's a specific working group that is kind of
yeah.
focused on form inputs and, and the kind of customizability of it. I can't.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
OpenUI is also doing a bunch of stuff
OpenUI.
that,
OpenUI is the one.
yeah,
OpenUI is the one.
yeah,
Yeah. So
they're
OpenUI.
doing a
I
bunch of
think
stuff.
OpenUI is specifically focused on forms. Is it not?
And
Yeah.
just generally, like, I know they're also proposing the tabs thing, like native tabs
Hmm.
components.
Interesting. Yeah.
Carousel
But
kind of came out of there also, but I don't know the current
yeah.
working implementation of Carousel. I don't think that's what they proposed, but
Hmm. But they initially
um,
started out as a working group specifically for just making forms better.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Now
I don't
here's a
know. I
sorry.
would like it. I would like
Okay.
to use it, but
I've heard some kind of about it, which is like, so I maybe just wanted mind the pun, validate it. Kind of get a sense of kind of what your like experience has been, because you tend to really kind of be very well versed in kind of these native stuff.
Yeah.
Here's some really great questions by Sam. So I'll quickly just throw them up here. What's the performance impact of Zod in production? Zod 3, not great. Zod 4, much better. But Zod 3, not that great. I actually have, just quickly Google while your screen is on the, just quickly Google Zod-dev. So I
Dash
actually,
dev, like
once again, this is one of those things where, but yeah, try that. There, third one. So generally, like, I don't think I'm gonna push this up to Zod 4 because I think Zod 4 is much better. But this is just a package that I wrote that effectively disables Zod validation in your prod. But this is if you're just using it for
interesting.
validation, not but for actual type checking. So,
Mm-hmm,
for example, APIs and stuff coming in, not for forms. So I think I have a comment there about like, don't use this when you're going to use safe parse. Like, still use safe parse, but this is for if you're kind of like just doing like checking for errors and stuff. So you get all those benefits in your dev environment, but then in prod, it just it swaps it out for a stub. Yeah, but Zod 4 is much better. It is easy to get into kind of like, so there's two parts. There's like the actual runtime performance, which is like your code running, but then there's also like the TypeScript parsing performance. And, like as you said, Schalk, you don't necessarily want to be actually putting every single country in an enum.
Yeah.
Because Zod is as per Colin's username, it is a bit of a hack. Like this isn't something that TypeScript kind of was meant to support. But like some people have been able to figure out clever ways in which you can map runtime schemas to static typing. I don't know about any other actual language that supports something like this. Like, it's kind of crazy. Like, just what you can do with TypeScript. But it is a bit of a hack. It's not like, so there are some coercing things into types from an actual value, and a schema is like, there are some stuff, like especially when you're doing a lot of type of stuff, so doing it enough, like, you can very easily run into problems. We definitely have run into problems in terms of validating our API inputs, and so what we ended up doing is just splitting out like a schema per feature. So this is all the API instead of one big API schema. So like, sometimes you need to work around those things. I'd say the user, if you're using the latest Zod, the user-facing stuff isn't that bad anymore. But like, it is like, if you can get some slowdowns in terms of your IDE, in terms of, like, if you update a schema and then obviously it has to convert all of that into types, and like, you just see that little TypeScript config thing spinning there at the bottom, like, and you type something and the red line stays, and then after 4 seconds it's gone. So that type of stuff. But also TypeScript's getting converted into Go, so that should also make that a lot better. But that's pretty far out. Then there's also another really great question. Yes,
Zod
go
4
ahead.
also brings in Zod Core and Zod Mini.
That one of the big problems with Zod 3 is the gorilla and the banana and the jungle. So it worked off inheritance. So you couldn't just pull out a little piece of it. You had to pull everything. If you wanted to validate a string, entire Zod's coming along for the ride. So what's really cool about Zod 4, and this is what's kind of like the appeal of stuff like Valleybot and so forth, is they did what Zod did, but they just made it kind of composable in terms of you can pull in parts of it. But now in Zod 4, you can do that as well. So I don't really see the use case of something like Valleybot anymore. Or I guess it's in line now with, it's kind of like an npm yarn situation where I guess you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
still use it, but the OG is now kind of on par with kind of like the
Mm,
improved one. Um,
yeah.
but so then in terms of, yeah, so that I guess should also speed it up quite a bit, because you don't have this massive hierarchy of prototypes.
Hmm.
Then there's a really great question. How can Zod be used in API request validation and so forth? Cool. Next.js, Express, and so forth. There's two things here. First one is if your backend is written in TypeScript or JavaScript, like there's a lot of great solutions. The one is TRPC, which is the one
Hmm.
I don't know if you've heard about it, Schalk Neethling.
Yep.
But if you can maybe just bring it up on the screen, that also
Sure.
uses Zod. Interestingly enough, that's the first time I was ever actually exposed to Zod, is TRPC. Check out TRPC. So TRPC, you actually create your backend schema in Zod. You'll see there on the left-hand side, and you have full-on end-to-end type safety from your backend all the way through your entire um, and then it kind of like uses RPC, so remote procedure calls and whatever. Check it out; it's really great. Um, if you don't, if you're not, if your backend isn't TypeScript, because obviously, like TypeScript has a way of, like, you can't just take you like if you want your types, your backend types to be valid on your front end, like you need to use the same typing system. You can't use like Haskell on your backend and now want to convert your Haskell types into TypeScript. So if or JavaScript, if at the very least you're using the same language backend and front end, that makes it a lot easier because you can just take those types and suck them in. If it's a
Hmm.
different language, I mean, like GraphQL, this is one of the reasons for GraphQL existing is that GraphQL is typed. So, like, if you expose it through GraphQL, you automatically get types. There's a lot of tools to convert GraphQL schemas into Zod. Okay. Another one is OpenAPI. If you're
Hmm.
not using GraphQL, which is like REST or whatever, you can just search OpenAPI to Zod. Um, Most servers, um, like can export endpoints as OpenAPI. Anything that's in Swagger, like you can just spit out OpenAPI. So OpenAPI is kind of like just a standard for actually marking up like your API, um, like schema and stuff, and you can just suck that into Zod and automatically create it. So yeah, I hope that's helpful. There's a lot of options. Luckily, this is something that a lot of people have. Also, JSON schema. There's a lot of JSON schema to Zod, Zod to JSON schema as well. I use it actually in my Astro projects quite a lot, where I mark it up in Zod, and then I actually export it as JSON schema as well. So then I automatically get on my JSON as I'm typing validation in VS Code, because VS Code can apply JSON schema to JSON files. You can give it like a glob, and like it actually gives you type errors. In the same way, if in a TS config or whatever, if you're typing, you get type errors, but it's just a JSON file. So like how the hell does it know? Like it's not TypeScript, it's JSON, and it's the same. You can use actually JSON schema as well. There's a lot of stuff like the beauty of Zod is like you can just Zod this, Zod that, Zod anything that's a schema can be converted into Zod, or Zod can be converted into that thing. So like it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, you're not gonna have to do a lot of Googling to kind of find stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. No. No.
Mm.
And
Okay,
as you see
go
here,
ahead. Yes.
native JSON schema conversion is now part of Zod 4.
Yes, and there's also something I think it's called standard schema or something, which is like
Oh,
all
yeah.
these libraries, like it's kind of like their
Mm.
own agreed, so like schema. So it's Valibot, Zod, all of these guys. I think it's called standard schema.
Hmm.
Yes,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, all of them subscribe to this as well. Yeah. No, so
Yep.
like if your question is, can I convert X into Zod or can I convert Zod into X? The answer is probably yes. Yeah, and here you can actually see all the validation libraries. Yeah. Okay. I need there's effect schema, so that's the one I spoke about, number 4.
Ah. Yeah.
Yeah. So people are saying like try that out, like that might kind of replace Zod for you, but I can't speak to that. I haven't yet. But a lot of people that I really kind of trust in terms of their opinions have told me that. Um,
Mm.
okay. I unfortunately need to head out. This is really great, Schalk. Thanks so much for this.
Thank you.
Where
Yeah,
can
no, my
people
pleasure.
follow you, get in touch with you, reach out to you?
I mean, mostly Blue Sky, LinkedIn, GitHub. Just search my name, YouTube.
Yeah.
I have a unique-ish enough name that
I
you
have the
should
same
be able to
thing.
find me pretty easy.
In the
So,
dev
but yeah, I
community.
think,
In the
yeah,
dev
I
community.
reckon
Yeah.
LinkedIn, just search for my name, YouTube,
Yeah.
Blue Sky,
Yes.
any of those places.
All right. Cool. All right. Thanks everyone for joining. And this was great. And yeah, we'll catch you guys soon again. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.